Hello, my name is Becky Frank, and I'm making this recording for Excelsior classes. Today, I want to share with you yet another amazing moment in American history. Today, I want to tell you about what happened to Aaron Burr after the duel with Alexander Hamilton. So, most people know Aaron Burr as the man who shot and killed Alexander Hamilton. The events leading up to the duel and the duel itself have been discussed quite a bit in recent years, thanks in part to a certain hit Broadway musical. But what happened to Aaron Burr after Alexander Hamilton died? Well, Burr's political career dies with Hamilton. In fact, it was pretty much over before he killed Alexander Hamilton, which is part why he challenged him to the duel. There were three events that Alexander Hamilton did play a role in, maybe not as big of a role as Burr built up in his mind, that led to Burr's downfall politically. The first happened in 1797 when Aaron Burr failed to be reelected in the U.S. Senate. He had defeated Philip Schuyler 6 years earlier, and Philip Schuyler will take that seat back when Aaron Burr runs for reelection. Philip Schuyler, by the way, happens to be Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law. So that was a blow to Burr. The second blow came in 1800 when he was the running mate of Thomas Jefferson. Because of the way the Constitution was set up, both men were in a tie for electoral college votes because everybody voted twice, and whoever got the most votes was president, whoever got second most votes was vice president. Well, this was before the concept of political parties, and they were in a deadlock tie in the House of Representatives for 36 ballots. Finally, Alexander Hamilton says, I would throw my weight behind Thomas Jefferson over Aaron Burr. Jefferson wins the presidency. Burr is completely eliminated from the Jefferson administration. He does the constitutionally mandated duties of the vice president, but that is it. He knows that he is not going to be chosen to be Jefferson's running mate. We fixed the whole little first place, second place thing with the 12th Amendment. And so in 1804, he runs for his party's nomination for governor of New York, which he loses because Alexander Hamilton campaigns against him, not for the other candidate, against Aaron Burr. This is the last straw in Burr's mind. He officially declares an affair of honor which must be settled on the dueling ground. The two men meet in New Jersey on November 11th, 1804, and the rest, as they say, is history. Alexander Hamilton is mortally wounded. He will die 36 hours later. Now, immediately following the duel, Alexander Burr goes into hiding. He goes to South Carolina, hangs out at his daughter's home. Both New York and New Jersey will issue warrants against him for the murder of Alexander Hamilton. They were both residents of New York, and the event took place in New Jersey, where dueling was sort of kind of illegal. It was officially illegal, but it was never prosecuted. He manages to avoid both of those warrants by just not going to New York or New Jersey. But he's not welcome in polite society anymore. He is not welcome in the circles of Washington, D.C. He is also deeply in debt. So he goes west to start over again. Now, Aaron Burr, being Aaron Burr, he is going to not do this in the way most people do. When Aaron Burr goes west, this is what he has in mind. This is Aaron Burr's Southwestern Empire. If he can't rule in America, he's going to rule in his own little world, or big world. It's a pretty big piece of real estate there he had his eye on. Now, what really happens a little sketchy. We do know that between 1805 and 1806, Aaron Burr approached many people trying to get financial support for his plan, trying to get people to help him with his own personal army. He included in his plot to take over part of the world Senator Jonathan Dayton from New Jersey and the British envoy to the United States, kind of like the ambassador, Anthony Merry, and the wealthy Ohioan Harmon Bendenhasset. Apparently, he had no problem telling people whatever it is they wanted to hear so that they would be on his side. So he never told the same story to two people. That's why it's kind of hard to know exactly what happened or exactly what his plans were, is because he was not honest with anybody about what he was trying to do. It appears that what he was going to do is take Florida, which is this, all of this is Florida at this point, from Spain and some of Mexico, and maybe toss in a little bit of the Louisiana Territory to create his empire. Now, in February of 1806, Thomas Jefferson had gotten a letter from the U.S. District Attorney in Kentucky. His name was Joseph Davies. Joseph Davies sent this letter, and he said there were Spanish intrigues against the United States. He indicated that a General James Wilkinson, who was the military commander in New Orleans, was a Spanish agent working for both the U.S. government and the Spanish government. Remember, Spain still owns Mexico at this point. Jefferson asked Davies to keep him apprised of developments, to keep him in the loop. And Davies continues to write letters naming Wilkerson as well as Burr. And then U.S. Attorney General John Breckinridge, William Henry Harrison and Henry Clay, and other prominent Democratic Republicans who were Jefferson's allies. Now, Joseph Davies was a Federalist. So he's lost a little bit of credibility with the president when he starts naming people like, William Henry Harrison and Henry Clay as co-conspirators with Wilkinson and Burr. Then his letters start to describe events that had happened in the 1790s as if they were current events. And that's when Jefferson stops accepting correspondence from Mr. Davies and says, okay, he doesn't have all his ducks in a row. But about the same time he stops receiving letters from Mr. Davies, this is September 1806, he begins hearing about Burr's activities from other people, probably more trustworthy sources than Mr. Davies. Colonel George Morgan, who was in western Pennsylvania, wrote the president that his son had been approached by Aaron Burr to be part of his army to take over this empire. And then in October of that same year, the postmaster, Gideon Granger, sent Jefferson word that Burr had also approached a General William Edenton, asking him to be second in command of his personal army. So Jefferson calls his cabinet together, and they decide, okay, John Graham, who was the secretary of the Louisiana Territory, was in Washington, just happened to be in Washington. They pull him in, they say, okay, look, you got to go talk to the governors of these territories out west, let them know what's going on, see if they know anything, and send back word to us. He said if there is evidence of overt action against the U.S. government, Burr should be arrested and brought back to Washington, D.C. They also sent letters to the governors of Mississippi and Louisiana territories telling them to be on the lookout for anything. And then they have to wait. There's no cell phones, there's no internet, there's not even a telegraph at this point. They just have to wait for word to get back. There's no other way to find out what's going on. So while they're waiting for John Graham to go out west and let people know what's going on and find out what's happening, they get a letter from General Wilkinson, Burr's co-conspirator. Wilkinson has had a change of heart. He has discovered that this might not go down the way they've got it planned, and he wants to cover himself. So he writes a letter to President Jefferson explaining to him what Burr has done, as if it was all Aaron Burr's idea and he had nothing to do with it. He says he has an unsigned, encoded letter from Burr stating that funds had been obtained for the mission, that naval aid from England was expected, and that the operations were ready to begin. This letter included a timeline for taking over the territory that Burr had his eye on. Wilkinson sends this information to Jefferson via a courier, and when Jefferson receives the packet in November of 1806, he consults with his cabinet, and they issue a general warning to all citizens of the United States of the suspected conspiracy. Now, Jefferson believed that Burr the people who were following Burr, not Burr, but the people who were following him, had been led to believe by Burr that he was acting on behalf of the federal government, that this was an official U.S. plan to take over Florida and Mexico. And Jefferson believed that once people realized that Burr was acting alone, that the plan would collapse because the people would no longer be following Burr. So Aaron Burr, meanwhile, is not aware that Wilkinson has betrayed him. And he is coming down the Ohio River and then the Mississippi River with an army of 60 men and 10 boats. He will be arrested in Natchez, Mississippi in February of 1807, and he will claim that he and the boys were just on their way to some land he had purchased in Mexico. They were going to start a farm there. There was no intent to overthrow the U.S. government. He will be, of course, arrested and charged with treason based on his communication with foreign ministers, both from Spain and Great Britain, and the letter that Wilkinson has provided with the evidence. So not only will Burr be the only sitting vice president to ever kill a person, he will also be the only one put on trial for treason. He is brought to Richmond, Virginia, and his trial will begin in March. Or he's brought to Richmond, Virginia in March, I'm sorry. His trial won't begin until August because it takes 4 grand juries to find one that will indict him. There is not a whole lot of evidence absent what Wilkinson has provided because he doesn't tell the same story to each person. It's a different story every time he talks to somebody. But he will be indicted, and the trial will begin in August of 1807. It will be presided over by Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall. And it was a mess. It was a mess from the beginning. Wilkinson's evidence turned out to be forged. And then President Jefferson challenged a subpoena for documents on the basis of executive privilege. Justice Marshall comes back and says, wait a minute, the Sixth Amendment due process, that trumps your executive privilege. Jefferson will comply, but he will insist that his compliance is voluntary. Burr, of course, will deny any wrongdoing. Marshall instructs the jury that there has to be 2 different witnesses to testify to at least 2 different acts of treason in order to be convicted, in order for Burr to be convicted. And the evidence that was at hand did not meet that strict threshold. So Burr will be acquitted on September 1st. He will be tried later for lesser charges and be acquitted of those as well. So, killing Hamilton wasn't enough. Now he's got this taint of being charged with treason. Even though he wasn't convicted, he was charged with betraying his country. He will go to Europe and spend several years trying to regroup and then return to New York in 1812 and resume his law practice. His practice is never robust enough to support his lifestyle. His only child, Theodosia, will be lost at sea in 1813, and then he will remarry. His first wife, whose name was also Theodosia, passed away in 1794. So in 1833, he will marry a wealthy widow for support, and she will divorce him in a year for mismanaging her financial resources. Just kind of by the way, her attorney in the divorce proceedings was a young man named Alexander Hamilton Jr. And that had to sting just a little bit for Burr, who had blamed Hamilton for his political downfall, and now Hamilton's son, Hamilton's namesake even, is representing his wife. Oops, I missed. This is the trial slide. Sorry. So after the divorce, Burr is forced to rely on charity of his friends, and he will die in September of 1836 after a series of strokes. It's not a very happy ending to Mr. Burr's story. Some historians will cite Burr's duel with Hamilton as the beginning of his downward spiral. There's evidence that he was spiraling downward before the duel. People say that Jefferson was the idealist of the national period, and Hamilton was the pragmatist of the national period. Aaron Burr was the opportunist. He seemed driven not by what was best for the country, or not what he wanted for the country, but what was best for Aaron Burr. And that will, of course, be his legacy. right. Thank you for hanging out with me and listening to my story. If you want to hear some more amazing moments of American history, you can check out some of my classes at excelsiorclasses.com. I have a variety of classes for children in grades 4 through 12, American history, Middle Ages, and economics. If you have any interest in these classes, you can contact me at Becky Frank at excelsiorclasses.com. Goodbye.